As I eased out of my garage, ready for a quiet Tuesday morning, there she was, arms folded tight, glaring at my Tesla like I'd just swiped it from her driveway. Before I could even open my mouth, she whipped out her phone, declaring she was calling the Homeowners Association and the cops. Her face was red with righteous fury, and I could already see curtains twitching as curious neighbors peeked out. I stood there, keys dangling, my brain scrambling to catch up with this sudden chaos. "This is my car," I said, keeping my tone calm, hoping to cool things down. "I've got all the paperwork." But she wasn't having it. Her voice shot up, loud enough to echo down the street as she dialed 911. "Yes, I'm reporting a stolen vehicle. A Tesla Model 3 right here in my neighborhood. The thief's standing there trying to drive off." Her performance was Oscar-worthy, equal parts dramatic and unnerving. I'd heard whispers about tough neighbors, but this was next level. As she ranted on, I pulled out my phone, instinct telling me to record this circus. "Ma'am," I tried again, my patience fraying but my voice steady. "I bought this car 3 months ago. It's registered in my name." She paused, just long enough to shoot me a venomous look. "That's what a thief would say," she snapped, then went back to her call, now claiming my car was her cousin's, complete with unique modifications. I blinked, baffled. My Tesla's as stock as they come, not a single custom detail. This woman was spinning a wild story, out of thin air, and I was caught in the middle of her script. Which city in the United States are you watching from? Drop a comment and share with us if you've had any run-ins with an HOA. We'd love to narrate your story on our channel. I had only moved into Oak Ridge Estates 6 months ago, drawn by the manicured lawns, quiet streets, and sense of community. The Homeowners Association had seemed like a reasonable trade-off for the well-maintained common areas and security. During the first few months, I had focused on settling in, unpacking boxes, and arranging furniture. The neighbors had seemed friendly enough with casual waves and occasional small talk as we collected our mail or wheeled out trash bins. Then I purchased my Tesla, a reward to myself after a significant promotion at work. It represented years of hard work and careful saving, a dream fulfilled. That's when I first noticed Karen Westfield's attention shift toward me. She was in her early 50s with an immaculate blonde bob and a perpetual expression of disapproval. As the treasurer of the Homeowners Association board, she wielded her authority like a weapon, patrolling the neighborhood for infractions of rules, both real and imagined. At first, it was just lingering glances whenever I drove past her house. Then came the friendly visits, ostensibly to welcome me to the neighborhood, though these welcomes always came with thinly veiled inquiries about my profession, income, and how I could afford such an expensive vehicle on a starter home budget. I had heard the whispers from other neighbors. "Watch out for Karen," they'd say with knowing looks. "She thinks she owns the place." Some shared stories of citations for grass 1/2 inch too tall, or threats of fines for trash cans left out 12 minutes past the designated collection time. But I had naively assumed that if I followed the rules, I would be left alone. I was wrong. The Tesla seemed to trigger something in her, a combination of envy and suspicion that quickly morphed into an obsession. The first official confrontation happened about a week after I brought the car home. I was washing it in my driveway when Karen marched up, clipboard in hand. "Excuse me," she said with artificial sweetness, "but I need to verify that this vehicle is registered with the Homeowners Association." I blinked in confusion. Water hose, still running in my hand. "I wasn't aware vehicles needed to be registered with the HOA," I replied. Her smile tightened. "All luxury vehicles must be approved and registered. It's in the bylaws, Section 14, Paragraph 3. It wasn't I had read the bylaws thoroughly before purchasing my home, but I didn't want to create unnecessary tension with someone who clearly held influence in the community. "I'd be happy to provide whatever documentation you need," I offered, hoping to resolve the matter quickly. She handed me a form that asked for not only the vehicle information, but also my purchase receipt, proof of income, and credit score. "This seems excessive for a car registration," I noted, scanning the document with growing concern. Karen's smile vanished entirely. "If you have nothing to hide, you should have no problem providing this information. Some people in this community have been known to live beyond their means or acquire property through questionable methods." The implication was clear, and it stung. I had worked incredibly hard for everything I owned. I returned the form the next day with only the vehicle information completed, along with a polite note explaining that financial details were not relevant to car ownership and not required by any legitimate homeowners association regulation. 3 days later, a formal notice appeared on my door, citing me for failure to comply with homeowners association documentation requirements and imposing a $75 fine. I immediately contested it through the proper channels, attaching copies of the actual bylaws that mention nothing about luxury vehicle registration. The fine was eventually dropped after I presented my case to the full board, several of whom seemed embarrassed by the situation. But Karen's campaign was just beginning. She began documenting every time I used my car, taking photographs whenever I parked, and claiming that the Tesla's charging setup was an unapproved electrical modification to my home. Notes began appearing on my windshield. "Inappropriately parked 3 and beyond property line or charging vehicles during peak hours violates community energy conservation efforts." None of these were actual violations, but the constant harassment was wearing me down. The rumors started next. I overheard conversations at the community pool that abruptly halted when I approached. Neighbors who had previously been friendly began to regard me with subtle suspicion. When I finally confronted one of them, Mike, who lived 2 doors down, he reluctantly admitted that Karen had been telling people that my car matched the description of a Tesla that had been stolen from her cousin in a neighboring city. "She's suggesting you might have gotten it through some shady dealer who doesn't check the paperwork too closely," Mike explained uncomfortably. "Look, I don't believe it, but Karen has a way of making people doubt things." I was furious, but determined to take the high road. I invited Mike to see my purchase documentation and even offered to take him to the dealership where the staff knew me by name. He declined, assuring me he didn't need proof, but the damage to my reputation was spreading. I considered legal action for defamation, but hesitated, not wanting to escalate what I still hoped might blow over with time and patience. Instead, I installed security cameras around my property. Sensing that Karen's fixation was reaching dangerous levels, the security system cost me nearly $2,000, money I hadn't planned to spend so soon after the Tesla purchase, but it gave me a sense of security that was becoming increasingly necessary. I opted for high-resolution cameras with night vision capability, motion sensors that would alert my phone, and cloud storage for all footage. The installation technician raised his eyebrows when I explained why I needed such neighbor disputes. "Can get ugly," he acknowledged, while mounting a camera with a clear view of my driveway. "But this sounds like something else entirely." I nodded grimly. "I'm hoping I'm overreacting," I told him. But recent events suggest otherwise. Within days of the system's installation, it captured Karen walking slowly past my house 3 separate times in a single afternoon, pausing each time to study my Tesla from the sidewalk. She seemed to be looking for something specific, circling the vehicle from a distance, staying just on the edge of what could legally be considered public property. When I mentioned this to a few trusted neighbors, I discovered that Karen had been asking increasingly specific questions about my schedule, when I left for work, when I typically returned, whether I traveled frequently. The pattern was becoming not just annoying, but genuinely concerning. My instincts proved correct when about a month after the initial confrontation, I returned from grocery shopping to find Karen in my driveway, peering through the windows of my Tesla with her hands cupped around her eyes. When she saw me, she didn't even have the decency to look embarrassed. "I was just confirming the vehicle identification number," she announced, as if this were a perfectly normal thing for a neighbor to do. My cousin's Tesla had a specific marking on the dashboard. I placed myself between her and my car. "Karen, this has gone too far. You are trespassing on my property. If you have genuine concerns about the vehicle's origins, the proper channel is through the police, not personal investigation." Her eyes narrowed. "Are you threatening me? I'm performing my duty as a homeowners association representative." I maintained my composure with effort. There is no homeowners association duty that permits you to trespass or harass homeowners. If you continue, I will be forced to file a formal complaint. She huffed and strode away, but not before calling over her shoulder, "We'll see who the real criminal is here." That night, I submitted a detailed report to both the Homeowners Association board and the local police department documenting the pattern of harassment. The police officer who took my statement seemed sympathetic, but explained they could only issue a warning at this stage. The Homeowners Association president sent a non-committal email promising to look into the matter. The situation escalated dramatically the following week. I had been working from home when an urgent client call pulled me away from my desk for nearly 2 hours. I hadn't closed the garage door after bringing in some packages, assuming I would be heading out again shortly. When I finally ended the call and walked back through the kitchen, I froze at the sight through the window. Karen was in my garage, actively trying to open the door of my Tesla. For a moment, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. This wasn't just harassment anymore. It was breaking and entering. My security system had sent several alerts to my phone during the call, but I had silenced notifications to focus on the important client conversation. Now, as I quickly reviewed the footage on my phone, I could see exactly how Karen had approached. First, walking past casually, then noticing the open garage and finally slipping inside after checking to ensure no one was watching. The timestamp showed she had been in my garage for over 15 minutes, first examining the exterior of the car before attempting to open the doors. There was nothing ambiguous about her intentions. This was a deliberate invasion of my property. My hands trembled slightly as I considered my options. I could confront her directly, call the police immediately, or document more evidence before acting. The lawyer in me, I work in corporate contract law, knew that having clear, indisputable evidence would be crucial if this situation continued to escalate. I decided to approach quietly and record the confrontation, creating a record that would show I had handled the situation calmly and professionally, despite the extraordinary circumstances. I quietly took out my phone and began recording as I stepped into the garage. "Karen, what do you think you're doing?" I asked, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. She spun around, startled, but quickly recovered her composure. "This car is stolen property," she declared loudly, as if volume could transform her lies into truth. "My cousin has been looking everywhere for it. The vehicle identification number has been tampered with, but I know this is hers." I continued recording as I maintained a safe distance. "Karen, you are trespassing in my garage and attempting to break into my vehicle. I've already called the police." Hadn't actually called them yet, but the bluff seemed necessary given the situation. Her response was not what I expected. Instead of retreating, she became more agitated. "This car is mine, well, my cousin's, but I have power of attorney. You stole it? I have the title at home to prove it." She was nearly shouting now, her face contorted with a rage that seemed disproportionate even to her fabricated scenario. I know people like you, moving into decent neighborhoods with things you couldn't possibly afford. Honestly, the implication was both clear and deeply offensive. Please leave my property immediately, I said, stepping aside to give her a clear path to exit. The authorities will sort this out. Instead of leaving, she reached into her purse and pulled out a set of keys, brandishing them like evidence. These are the spare keys. They'll work on this car because it belongs to my family. I continued recording as she approached the vehicle again, attempting to insert a key that was clearly not made for a Tesla into the door. When it didn't work, she became even more frantic. You changed the locks. That's further proof of theft. The situation had moved beyond ridiculous into genuinely concerning. Karen wasn't just being difficult. She seemed to be experiencing some kind of break from reality. I stopped recording long enough to actually call 911, keeping my voice low as I requested immediate assistance for a home invasion. When I resumed filming, Karen was examining the charging port with an expression of triumph. This modification wasn't here before. You've altered stolen property. She was creating evidence out of standard features, constructing an elaborate fantasy that cast me as a criminal. I decided to try a different approach. Karen, I have all the documentation for
this vehicle. Would you like to see it?
I offered, hoping that concrete evidence might penetrate her delusion. She paused, momentarily uncertain, before nodding stiffly. Yes. Show me the paperwork you forged. I kept recording with one hand while using the other to retrieve the vehicle. Registration from the glove compartment, making sure to unlock the car with my key fob to further demonstrate owner. As I handed her the documents, I also pointed out the vehicle identification number clearly visible through the windshield. You can verify this matches the registration. It's been in my name since purchase. Karen scrutinized the papers, her expression darkening. These look official, but that doesn't mean anything in the digital age. Anyone can create fake documents. She thrust the papers back at me and suddenly lunged forward, attempting to snatch the key fob from my other hand. Give me the keys to my
car, she demanded, her fingers clawing at my closed fist. I stepped back quickly, maintaining my grip on both the keys and my phone. Karen, stop. This is assault.
She was beyond reasoning now, advancing toward me with such intensity that I had to retreat further into my own home to maintain a safe distance. You thieves are all the same, she spat, following me into my kitchen uninvited. You think you're so clever, but I've been watching you. I know what you did. The police are going to arrest you, and then the Homeowners Association will evict you from this community. I continued backing away, unwilling to physically engage, even to remove her from my home. The situation had become surreal. A neighbor I barely knew was standing in my kitchen attempting to steal my car keys while accusing me of the very crime she was actively committing. Fortunately, the sound of sirens in the distance seemed to penetrate her frenzy. Her head snapped toward the window, then back to me with narrowed eyes. You called them? You'll regret that. My brother-in-law is a district attorney. You have no idea who you're dealing with. The threats continued as the police cruiser pulled into my driveway, lights flashing. 2 officers approached cautiously, responding to what had been reported as a home invasion. I met them at the door, phone still recording, and quickly explained the situation. Karen immediately launched into her version of events, speaking over me with practiced authority. Officers, I'm Karen Westfield, treasurer of the Oakridge Estates Homeowners Association. This man has stolen my cousin's Tesla and has been living in our community under false pretenses. I have evidence that the vehicle identification number has been tampered with. The older officer maintained a neutral expression as he turned to me. Sir, do you have documentation for the vehicle in question? I nodded, relieved that professionalism had entered the chaotic scene. Yes, officer. I have the registration, purchase, agreement, and insurance, all in my name. I also have video evidence of Ms. Westfield trespassing in my garage and attempting to take my keys by force. The officers separated us, with the younger one taking Karen to one side of the driveway, while the senior officer reviewed my documentation and watched the video I had recorded. His expression remained professional, but I could see his eyebrows rise slightly at certain points in the footage. After confirming the vehicle identification number matched my paperwork, he conferred briefly with his partner before approaching Karen again. I couldn't hear their full conversation, but the tone shifted from questioning to increasingly formal and stern. Miss Westfield, you mentioned having a title for this vehicle. Could you produce that document? The officer asked. Karen's confident demeanor faltered slightly. I don't have it with me. It's at home. If you'll just come with me, I can show you. The officer shook his head. That won't be necessary. We can verify vehicle ownership through our database. He stepped away to do just that, speaking into his radio while his partner continued questioning Karen. I remained where I was, still recording discreetly, unwilling to risk missing any part of this encounter in case it became relevant later. After what seemed like an eternity, but was probably only about 15 minutes, the senior officer returned to address us both. The vehicle is registered legally to the homeowner, he stated definitively, gesturing toward me. Mrs. Westfield, there is no record of a stolen Tesla matching this description, nor any connection between you or any relative and this specific vehicle. Karen's face flushed deeply. That's because the theft wasn't reported yet. My cousin has been out of the country. I only recently discovered where her car ended up. The officers exchanged a glance that spoke volumes. Ma'am, based on the evidence we've gathered, including the video recording, property records, and vehicle documentation, you are currently trespassing on private property and have attempted to take possession of a vehicle that does not belong to you. The younger officer stepped forward. Additionally, you followed the homeowner into his residence without permission. After attempting to forcibly take his keys, Aaron's expression transformed from indignation to disbelief as she realized the direction this was taking. This is ridiculous. I am a respected member of this community. I was conducting an investigation as part of my homeowners association duties. Her voice had risen to a near shriek. The officer remained unmoved. The homeowners association has no legal authority to enter private property without permission or to conduct criminal investigations. Those actions are reserved for law enforcement. He turned slightly toward his partner. Based on the evidence and witness statement, we have probable cause for arrest on charges of trespassing, attempted theft, and possibly breaking and entering. Karen's face drained of color as the younger officer took out handcuffs. You can't be serious. This is all a misunderstanding. But her protests fell on deaf ears as the officer recited her rights while securing the restraints around her wrists. Neighbors had begun to gather at the edges of my property, watching with undisguised curiosity as Karen Westfield, the self-appointed neighborhood watchdog, was escorted to the police cruiser. Her final words before being placed in the vehicle were directed at me with venomous intensity. This isn't over. The Homeowners Association will hear about this. I provided a formal statement to the officers, sharing copies of all documentation and video evidence. They advised me to file for a restraining order and to document any further contact or harassment. As they prepared to leave, the senior officer paused. We've had complaints about this woman before, he admitted quietly, but never anything this serious. You did the right thing by recording everything and not engaging physically. I nodded, suddenly exhausted, as the adrenaline began to fade.
I just want to live peacefully in my home, I told him. I never expected anything like this when I moved here. After the police cruiser pulled away with Karen in the back seat, I sat on my front steps for a long moment, trying to process everything that had happened.
The neighborhood had fallen eerily quiet, with curious onlookers having dispersed once the excitement ended. One neighbor, an older woman named Eleanor, whom I had only spoken with briefly before, approached hesitantly from across the street. "Are you all right, dear?" she asked, genuine concern in her voice. I managed a weak smile and nodded. "I think so. Just processing." She settled beside me on the steps with surprising agility for someone in her 70s. "Karen has been the neighborhood terror for nearly a decade," Eleanor confided, her voice low, despite the empty street. "The board has enabled her because she does the work no one else wants to do, enforcing rules, handling complaints, organizing meetings. But there's a difference between dedication and obsession, and she crossed that line years ago." I glanced at her, surprised by her candor. Why hasn't anyone stopped her before now? Eleanor sighed, looking suddenly every one of her years. Fear, complacency, the bystander effect. Take your pick. Most of us just tried to stay off her radar, but what she did to you... She shook her head firmly, and that crossed every line, criminal lines, and we all saw it happen. The conversation with Eleanor marked the beginning of what would become a surprising silver lining to the entire ordeal. A genuine sense of community with my neighbors that had been missing since I moved in. As news of Karen's arrest spread throughout Oakridge Estates, people I had barely exchanged pleasantries with before sought me out to offer support, sharing their own experiences and express relief that someone had finally stood up to the neighborhood tyrant. It seemed that Karen's reign of terror had affected far more residents than I had realized, but most had suffered in silence, afraid of becoming her next target if they spoke out. The aftermath was immediate and dramatic. By evening, my phone was buzzing constantly with texts and calls from neighbors I'd barely spoken to before, all eager to share their own Karen stories and express support. The community forum app was alight with discussions, some defending Karen as just doing her job, but most expressing shock at the extent of her behavior. I avoided engaging directly, instead focusing on securing my property and consulting with an attorney about next steps. The following day, I received a formal email from the Homeowners Association president expressing deep concern over the unfortunate incident and assuring me that Karen's actions in no way represented the values or procedures of the association. It was carefully worded to avoid any admission of liability while distancing the organization from Karen's behavior. No apology was offered, nor any acknowledgement that they had ignored my previous complaints about her escalating harassment. 3 days later, a certified letter arrived announcing an emergency meeting of the Homeowners Association Board to address recent events that have impacted community harmony. I attended, accompanied by my lawyer, prepared to present my case if necessary. It wasn't. Karen's arrest had made the local news, and the board was in full damage control mode. They announced her voluntary resignation from the treasurer position and unveiled a new homeowner bill of rights designed to prevent abuse of authority, all without ever directly acknowledging what had happened or their role in enabling her behavior over the years. The atmosphere in that meeting room was tense, with homeowners exchanging knowing glances as the board attempted to rewrite history in real time. Several of my neighbors had brought copies of the citations and warning letters they'd received from Karen over the years, some for infractions so minor they bordered on absurd. One elderly resident tearfully described how Karen had threatened to fine her for having a medical equipment delivery van parked in her driveway overnight, despite it being clearly allowed under both state law and homeowners association bylaws for medical necessities. Another showed photographs of Karen measuring his grass with a ruler and documenting the results in a small notebook she carried specifically for neighborhood infraction. What became increasingly clear as the meeting progressed was that Karen's behavior toward me, while extreme, wasn't an isolated incident, but rather the culmination of years of unchecked authority. The Homeowners Association board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats as homeowner after homeowner stood to share their experiences. Some board members appeared genuinely shocked, while others, those who had served alongside Karen for years, seemed more concerned with damage control than addressing the systemic issues that had allowed such abuse to flourish. It was only after several homeowners shared their own experiences of intimidation and harassment that the board issued a more genuine apology. The president, visibly uncomfortable, admitted that complaints about Karen had been minimized or dismissed for years, due to her dedication and attention to detail. Those euphemisms for her controlling and intrusive behavior had allowed the situation to escalate unchecked until it culminated in criminal charges. A new system for anonymously reporting homeowners association overreach was established along with clearer limitations on board member authority. One particularly powerful moment came when Thomas Rodriguez, who had served on the board with Karen for 5 years before resigning in frustration, stood up to address the current members. "I warned you," he said, his voice quiet but intense. 3 years ago, when she began photographing children playing too loudly in their own yards, I warned you that her behavior was becoming increasingly unhinged. When she tried to find the Johnson family because their son's wheelchair ramp disrupted the architectural harmony of the neighborhood, I begged you to intervene. You chose to look the other way because she kept the books balanced and did the unpleasant work of enforcement. Then he gestured toward me in the documentation of my ordeal projected on the meeting room screen. This is the direct result of your collective failure to act when action was needed. The room fell silent after Thomas's statement. No one could argue with the truth of his words, not even the board members who had been complicit through their inaction. It was a turning point in the meeting, shifting from damage control to genuine accountability. By the end of the evening, 2 long-serving board members had submitted their resignations, acknowledging their role in enabling Karen's behavior over the years. A special election was scheduled to replace them with homeowners who would prioritize community welfare over rigid rule enforcement. As for Karen, she was released on bail pending trial with conditions that included staying at least 500 FT from me and my property. Through my attorney, I learned that when questioned further by police, she had been unable to provide any information about the cousin whose Tesla had allegedly been stolen. There were no police reports, no insurance claims, no documentation whatsoever to support her story. When pressed, she eventually admitted that she didn't actually have a cousin who owned a Tesla or any cousin in the area at all. The truth which emerged during the investigation was simultaneously more mundane and more disturbing than a simple case of mistaken vehicle ownership. Karen had been fixated on acquiring a Tesla herself for over a year, constantly talking about it to neighbors and family members. She had even placed a deposit on one, only to have her financing fall through. According to her ex-husband, who provided a statement to investigators, she had become increasingly bitter about seeing others driving the car she couldn't have, particularly younger homeowners whom she deemed undeserving. What none of us in the neighborhood had known, but what came to light during the legal proceedings, was that Karen's fixation on Teslas had begun after her divorce 3 years earlier. Her ex-husband had purchased one shortly after their separation, upgrading his lifestyle in ways that Karen perceived as a direct slight against her. Her therapist, whose notes became part of the court record after Karen's defense team requested a psychological evaluation, had documented this obsession developing into what she termed replacement envy, a sense that others were obtaining the life and possessions that Karen believed should rightfully be hers. The psychological report painted a picture of a woman whose identity had become dangerously intertwined with her role as the neighborhood authority figure. When her personal life had fallen apart, she had compensated by exerting even greater control over her environment, specifically Oakage Estates and its residents. Her ex-husband's Tesla had become a symbol of everything she had lost, and seeing another one appear in her territory, driven by a younger, seemingly successful new resident, had triggered a response that went far beyond normal envy or resentment. While not legally insane, the evaluation concluded that Karen had developed a significant reality distortion specifically centered around the vehicle and what it represented to her. My arrival in the neighborhood with the exact model she had tried to purchase had apparently triggered an obsession that gradually consumed her. What began as envy evolved into a conviction that somehow I had stolen her dream. A metaphorical theft that in her increasingly distorted thinking transformed into literal theft. By the time she confronted me in my garage, she had fully convinced herself of her fabricated reality. The psychiatrist appointed by the court used terms like delusional disorder and pathological envy, but to me it seemed simpler. Karen couldn't stand seeing someone else have something she wanted. The most disturbing revelation came during the discovery phase of the legal proceedings when investigators recovered a journal Karen had been keeping. The journal, which her attorney initially tried to suppress, contained detailed entries about my daily routine, diagrams of my property, and even a list of suspicious behaviors that supposedly proved my Tesla was stolen. These behaviors included such innocent actions as washing the car regularly, removing evidence, checking the vehicle identification number myself, memorizing the altered number, and installing security cameras. Paranoid actions indicating guilt. Most chilling of all were the pages where she had practiced forging what she believed a Tesla title might look like, complete with my vehicle identification number, which she had somehow obtained, and her cousin's name as the rightful owner. The prosecutor showed me selected pages from the journal during preparation for what would have been the trial. In 20 years practicing law, I've rarely seen this level of methodical obsession in a case that didn't involve stalking charges, she told me, her expression grave. If you hadn't documented everything so thoroughly, this could have gone very differently. She was building an elaborate case against you, and given her standing in the community, some people might have believed her. The thought sent a chill through me how close I had come to having my reputation permanently damaged by someone's distorted perception of reality. The district attorney pursued charges of criminal trespassing, attempted grand theft auto, and breaking and entering. Karen's attorney negotiated a plea deal that included probation, community service, mandatory psychiatric treatment, and a permanent restraining order protecting me and my property. She was also required to pay restitution for my legal expenses and security system upgrades. The Homeowners Association, facing potential liability for failing to address her previous behavior, quickly approved all my pending home improvement requests and waived my dues for the remainder of the year, a small gesture that nonetheless signaled a significant power shift. I considered selling my home and moving to a neighborhood without a homeowners association, but ultimately decided to stay. The community had rallied around me once the truth came out, and several of my neighbors had become genuine friends through the ordeal. More importantly, I refused to be driven away from a home I loved because of one person's irrational behavior. The Tesla remained parked in my driveway, a symbol not just of my professional success, but now also of my refusal to be intimidated or controlled. In the months that followed, Oakage Estates underwent a remarkable transformation. With Karen's influence removed, the community began to heal from years of divisive enforcement and petty regulations. The new board members, elected in a special vote with record turnout, prioritized community building over rule enforcement. The annual block party, which had apparently been cancelled years earlier due to Karen's concerns about noise pollution and potential liability, was reinstated with enthusiasm. Families who had been reluctant to use common areas for fear of citations began to enjoy the neighborhood parks and pool. Children played outside more freely, and residents invested in home improvements that had previously been discouraged or micromanaged to death under Karen's watchful eye. I found myself becoming unexpectedly involved in the community renaissance, joining the Architectural Review Committee with a mandate to streamline the approval process and focus on structural integrity rather than aesthetic uniformity. My legal background proved useful in rewriting outdated bylaws to protect homeowners from the kind of harassment I had experienced. Eleanor, my elderly neighbor who had reached out after Karen's arrest, became the unofficial neighborhood historian, sharing stories of what Oakage Estates had been like before Karen's rise to power and helping to resurrect traditions that had fallen by the wayside during her tenure. One particularly meaningful change came in the form of the Good Neighbor Initiative, a program I helped develop that emphasized community service and mutual support over surveillance and enforcement. Instead of reporting violations, neighbors were encouraged to offer assistance, helping an elderly resident with yard work, organizing a meal train for a family experiencing illness or hardship, or collaborating on projects that benefited everyone. And the spirit of the community shifted noticeably from one of suspicion and competition to one of cooperation and shared purpose. The final irony emerged when I encountered Karen's ex-husband at a community event months later. After awkwardly acknowledging our connection, he hesitantly shared a detail that put the entire bizarre saga into perspective. "You know," he said, shaking his head, "the craziest part is that she could have afforded that Tesla if she'd really wanted it. She inherited money from her parents more than enough, but she was so obsessed with controlling how others spent their money that she never felt entitled to enjoy her own." He paused, then added quietly, "Sometimes I think what she really couldn't stand wasn't that you had something she wanted. It was that you had the freedom to want it in the first place."